The E25 is one of the dirtiest tanks in World of Tanks, and today's video is going to showcase exactly why this tank is so dirty and of course why this tank is so good on World of Tanks itself, and hopefully you enjoy. Now then, the map that we're on is of course Redchar, for those of you that have pointed out already, but the key thing about the E25 that we have in today's replay is that this thing is one of the most stealthy tanks that you can actually get within the game, and that is because the concealment factor of this tank is pretty much broken. It's a kind of it's kind of like a pre-World of Tanks sort of concealment rating, by which that you actually don't really get a penalty for actually firing in the E25, and also because of the slimline profile and also the camo factor of the tank itself, you also get such a great ability to outspot most of your opponents, and often half the time if you actually get spotted in the E25 it's usually your fault, or that you already knew that that was going to happen, so you don't really have to worry about being found out in a lot of positions. And of course if you can use the bush mechanics within World of Tanks, then it becomes even worse. And the key thing about the E25 as well is that you have this insane rate of fire, and by insane I genuinely mean you're reloading in about 1.8 seconds roughly, off the top of my head, and that means that you can dish out what, like 40 rounds a minute, and when you're dealing 150 damage per shell it soon adds up. And when you're basically kind of a pea shooter that can just deal damage recklessly against a lot of the opponents that you'll be facing, then you can kind of combine all your shots into a nice neat little package that you can push out against all of your opponents. And often, a lot of the time, if you actually use your tank correctly, as with the E25, you can actually retrack a lot of the opponents that you'll be facing, and therefore you can just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, even 10 shots into them and take out their entire hit point. Now the best tank to come up against, in my personal opinion, in the E25, just purely because of the amount of health that they own, and also because of their armor profile, is of course the Tiger 1 or any of the Tiger variants that are currently within World of Tanks, and that is because you basically never bounce, you can steal all of their hit points, they're super easy to retrack, and that is the kind of juiciest target that you can kind of come up against with this tank. Now what you'll notice here is that our player here, iDuck, is kind of being in a position where he keeps getting spotted, and that is not really what the 25 is all about. It's all about kind of maintaining distance, being able to retrack opponents, and being able to just pin them down, as the Skoda T25 is finding out within this replay, and that is basically it for the Skoda. And that is why I think I love the E25 so much. However, the one problem I do have with this tank is that Wargaming basically know that this thing is, to all intents and purposes, overpowered, and they take advantage of that by basically selling it to loads of people for a kind of pumped up value, and often you'll see this tank come on sale for like £40, £50, maybe even more. Back in the day they said that this tank would never be in sale, but of course Wargaming being Wargaming, they sell it whenever they really want to, or whenever their, I guess, sales budget isn't quite hitting the mark. So yeah, I'm not particularly too much of a fan of that, knowing full well that they know it's kind of broken and horrific for the gameplay. Now one thing that you'll note in this game is it's 6-3, and it appears as though Duck's game here is actually coming to a bit of an end, or at least that's what you would think because of the result. You can see the enemy team are up by 2,000 hit points, which in a tier 7 game is not particularly fantastic for him. However, the tables can quickly turn, and you're about to see how quickly these tables can turn when you're in a machine like this that can just whack out this damage onto opponents that really have no chance, to be honest with you. That's because the view range of the tank is perfect as well, so it's not even like you get super camo but then, you know, the view range isn't so great, so you have to rely on your teammates. You pretty much get everything with this tank, albeit you don't have a turret, and I guess that's kind of the only negative you can really think of with this, or at least I can think of. Now then, with this replay, what do you kind of hope with the E25 and why is it so broken? Well, I think it's because purely of this ability to get around the map, mobilize, stay undetected, be able to deal out loads of DPM, be able to retrack opponents, basically be a complete nuisance to the gameplay and the enemy team, of course. And what you're seeing here is when the E25 goes on a bit of an aggressive play, and you can see that he's trying to outflank and do something because, of course, the majority of the enemy team are kind of focused in this area and also right in front of him. Now, because of the camo and concealment of this tank, you're able to see that he can spot the opponents that are right in front of him. Now, what you see him do is actually relocate the tank so he can get into a position where he remains undetected because of the spotting mechanics, because he pulled back behind the bush to make use of that, whilst also then kind of spotting for his team, and hopefully some of his team will be able to get some shots onto them. Now, that wasn't the case in this regard. However, what he'll do is just do the exact same. Repoke the bush, hope that he can hit the opponent, and then hope he can get some damage or spotting damage into them. So once he's won this flank, he can then move into a better position, put view range into the central part of the map, and then be able to kind of find where they are and then deal with the rest and the remaining enemy forces. Now, what he's doing here, from what I can gather, is he's going to push up a little bit further so he can get some shots into things like the Hellcat, who's trying to cap. We absolutely hate cappers here on this channel, and that's because it's such a boring way to win. Who actually wants to win by cap? It is just... it's one of those things that you only ever really should cap if you genuinely have no other way of winning the game, or alternatively if you're not really going to do any more damage within the game. And even then, if you're not doing any more damage, if you know that your team are going to win, it's kind of toxic to actually jump in the cap anyway. So yeah, it's kind of one of those things that I absolutely despise. But nevertheless, capping is not what this game is about. This game is about tearing apart the opponents, and that is exactly what you're seeing here against the T-34-85, who made the mistake of trying to push. And this is the moment at which the E25 comes into its element. We have multiple opponents cresting ridge lines, exposing themselves, and the ability for this E25 to pinpoint a lot of the weak points of these tanks, to be able to track, to be able to just be a real nuisance, like we've said before. And that is where I think that this tank, over a lot of the others, is like the top performer. And unfortunately, he low rolls the Leo, which means that he does not manage to take him out all in one. However, the Caro is about to find out what playing against a super high DPM tank is like. And you know, when we talked about the Tiger 1 at the beginning of the game being one of those tanks that you just want to find, well, you're about to witness a Tiger 1 being farmed by the E25. And of course, it's not fun for the Tiger 1, albeit he is AFK in the cap circle. So what you're seeing here is iDuck taking full advantage of the Tiger 1 sat in the cap. Unfortunately, he doesn't actually continuously spot him, but he does need to be wary of this Caro, because ultimately he's the one that's not actually AFK and the one that's going to pose a threat to him. However, with the premium rounds of the E25 being fairly decent, I believe you've got in the region of about like 190 pen, something like that. We can actually have a look here, 194 pen. So that means that you're not really going to ever have a problem, and when you can farm people like the Tiger 1 who sat out in the open, unfortunately missing that one, and you're kind of just dealing damage left, right and centre. 5,035 damage done, and with only 3 rounds left, it's kind of super critical that they all hit. Now, his team are kind of failing, and it is a bit disappointing to actually see, because with 3 rounds left and 4 opponents, he's not going to win the game unless he somehow manages to ram or does something very spectacular. And that's kind of the problem with the E25, is that no, the balancing factor isn't the fact that you can basically have no turret, or maybe that you're got no armor. It's actually the fact that you can't deal any more damage when your rounds are out. And unfortunately for this T150, he still has 1 round left for him, and he puts that nicely into him. The T50-2, which is probably not the tank you want to come up against in the E25, decides he's going to YOLO, and that means that he has 0 shots remaining within this game, and that is genuinely the end of his game. He cannot do anything else. The only way to win would be to ram 2 tanks, one of them being an E25, one of them being an IS-2S, which of course is never going to go very well. He's picked up 9 kills within this replay, which is of course insane, and had dealt at least 5,351 damage, getting 2,084 assistance. And of course carrying the game super hard, albeit that his team kind of let him down in the fact that he had to deal with so much damage that he ran out of rounds. Now then, luckily for iDuck here, he actually secures the victory, which was something I wasn't expecting whatsoever, and that is because he managed to outplay the opponents and they didn't have time to cap, and that is exactly what you can do with this kind of machine, where you remain undetected, be a super nuisance, and basically bait the opponents into trying to track you down as a little pesky tier 7 tank destroyer. We'll have a look at the post-games results here. Now then, for such a great game, he managed to pick up 104,000 silver with premium account. Of course, he then also got some personal reserves, which enabled him to get even more. And of course, he did manage to pick up 69,000 silver for the win in this game, which is of course another reason why you can play the E25, since this thing does actually make silver. And of course he did spend quite a lot on ammunition because of having to fire those premium rounds, but it is not 100% necessary that you fire only premium rounds in the E25, since they're not that awful, but in tier 8 games you may have to do that. But having dealt 6,101 damage, 9 kills and picking up 2,400 base experience, that is one of the best games I think I've seen in a long time in the E25. And of course, if you want to check out games similar to that of iDuck and many other amazing players, then make sure to subscribe and also check out some of the gameplays on screen right here, where you can see a world record AMX M454 gameplay, and of course the King Panzer 7, or otherwise known as the VK7201. Yeah, really great replays, and of course check those out, and I hope that you'll join me there. Goodbye.